absolutely, Avinash. And I get your points about it's a little bit of a mixed blessing in some regard. So let me start off with a couple of basics. So there were three separate ESSER funds, and we are now in the third and final sort of period of ESSER funds. So ESSER 1 and 2 are now done. Those funds have to have been under contract and then spent, right? And there's federal terms for that. I'm not going to get too wonky in the details. So we're in the third ESSER fund that came from the American Rescue Plan Act, ESSER 3, if you will, and it basically runs out. So you have to essentially have a plan, a contract in place for those funds by September 30th of next year. And then you get a little bit extra time to fully liquidate. Now you can be spending or liquidating those funds now, but there's a little bit of flexibility on that. And this is by far the largest fund. So we're about 50% the way through spending down this fund. By my calculations, using U.S. Department of Education data, we still have around $60 billion that needs to be obligated and spent. And just to translate that, right, that's $5 billion a month between now
Yeah.
and September of next year. Like, it's a lot of money, right? And that money has to go somewhere. And what's really interesting, Avinash, about these dollars is they're super flexible. So to address your concern, a lot of places, a lot of districts and states have used these dollars, frankly, as a down payment to sort of start something, see if it works. And what's unique about these dollars is that if it works, they can move to different sources of funding, other federal dollars, state and local dollars. That's generally not true when you talk about federal funding. If you start something with federal funding, you have to keep using federal funding. But these dollars are different because you could start them with the ESSER dollars and continue them on with other sources of funding. And then just to take a step back, like those sound like a lot of big numbers.
Yeah.
In truth, they're actually not that big when you think about the entire K-12 system. So annually, Avinash, K-12, federal, state, and local, all of those dollars combined, we spend almost $800 billion a year
Yep.
on K-12, just K-12 education. And so now, admittedly, 75-ish percent plus or minus goes to staffing, right? So that's a huge number, but still, we're talking 160 to 200 billion dollars a year that are being spent in K-12 education that are not staff related.
Yep.
Okay, and so the other thing to keep in mind is that coming out of COVID, and now this is changing, right? But I would say, as a general rule of thumb, most states and most districts, the economies and the revenues have been decent, right? So the stimulus money hasn't been replacing lost dollars like happened back in 2008-9 during the Great Recession.
Yeah.
These are generally dollars that are on top of state and local spending. So when the ESSER dollars run out, we're still talking about a lot of spending. And I will tell you this, and this is true. It has been true. I think it'll continue to be true. There's money to be spent, and budgets are about priorities.
Yeah.
And so I would always make the argument, and always will make this argument, that if you can align your solution, what you offer, with the needs that have been identified by the leaders in the district, by the teachers, by the students, they will find money to continue working with you if it's having an impact in addressing the need that they have. So I sometimes think of ESSER, it is kind of like a little bit of a sugar high, right, in some
Yeah.
respects, because it's this bump in spending. But what real good leaders are doing is thinking about, how can I use these ESSER dollars to maybe pay for things? For example, construction projects have been really funded by ESSER dollars. Well, guess what? At some level, all money is fungible. So if they're not using state and local money to do construction projects, that money is freed up to use it on potentially other things, right? Because they use ESSER money for that. So there's a little bit of that. The dollars can be moved around, not super easily, but they can be. And what was otherwise spent in a budget could be covered by the stimulus money, the ESSER dollars, and now something could be freed up elsewhere in the budget. And then last point I'll make real quick. So there's a famous saying, particularly in DC, never let a good crisis go to waste, right? It's a little crass, it's a little cold-hearted, but there's a lot of truth in it. When you want to make substantial change to a system, to the way people do things, well, there's no better time than when everything is kind of crashing down around you, right? And that was actually a famous quote from the 2008-9 recession. It still holds true now, Avinash. And so what I've seen state and district leaders do is look at their budgets and say, you know what? I'm spending money on some things that aren't being used. And if they're being used, they're not very effective, or our needs have changed. And why are we still spending our money on solutions or products or services that just aren't the same anymore, right? Because what we don't want to do is rebuild the exact same system we had before the pandemic, because for too many kids, too many communities, too many families, it didn't work very well. And so
Yeah.
you have a lot of leaders saying, you know what, we do have money. We have thought about our budget differently. We're going to use the stimulus money as kind of a down payment or a way to take care of other needs and really focus our budget going forward on the needs that we really need. Like, oh, by the way, the mental health of our students, helping students to really engage with learning and, complement that academic focus with everything else, which I know you know so much about. So I'll stop there. I could keep going.